shocking disaster. China's ultra-luxury 1.3 billion sky tower is cracking apart. Announcer VO. A $1.3 billion architectural miracle. The absolute pinnacle of high society living, piercing the smog of one of China's most competitive financial hubs. This was supposed to be the most exclusive address in the entire country, a vertical fortress for billionaires, tech tycoons, and elite investors. But tonight, that dream is fracturing. Literally deep inside the core of the newly minted 432 Lujiazui Avenue Tower in Shanghai, the walls are crying out. Hairline fractures are expanding into deep structural chasms. A massive, record-breaking skyscraper, the tallest pure residential monument in the region when the ribbon was cut, is systematically destroying itself from the inside out. And the most terrifying part of this entire disaster? The billionaire buyers who paid up to 140 million yuan for a single unit were never told the truth. But the men in hard hats, the elite engineers who poured the foundations, they knew. They saw this exact structural nightmare coming years before a single resident ever turned a key in a front door. Fast-paced visuals, cut to hyper-stylized drone footage of a breathtakingly slender, ultra-white concrete skyscraper towering over the Shanghai skyline. The camera rapidly zooms past glittering glass penthouses, suddenly cutting to gritty, leaked smartphone footage, water cascading down emergency stairwells, ruptured concrete exposing rusted steel rebar, and the ominous, echoing T8 thud of structural shifting during a high-wind typhoon. Kinetic, UA-cabled news-style data graphics flash across the screen, with 500+ independent defects. 104,000 a part. 1 billion yuan. Repair bill, annonceur, VO. Those three catastrophic metrics all belong to the exact same super-tall high-rise, and every single one of them traces back to a singular, fatal design decision, choosing flawless aesthetics over physics. Welcome to 402 Lujiazui Avenue. From the crowded sidewalks of Shanghai's glittering financial core, that immaculate white grid looks like a triumph of modern art. But that smooth white surface isn't decorative cladding. It isn't a curtain wall of glass bolted onto an interior frame like every other traditional skyscraper dominating the Bund. No, that white concrete is the structure. Engineers call it an exterior structural exoskeleton. It is a load-bearing outer spine doing the heavy lifting that massive steel core columns usually handle. In plain English, the skin and the bones of this tower are the exact same thing, which means when that flawless white facade begins to split, crack, and shed chunks of raw concrete onto the streets below, you are not looking at a superficial paint problem. You are looking at a terminal structural failure of the building's skeletal system. How does a brand new, top-of-the-market luxury mega project start falling apart less than a decade after completion? Especially when the design team warned the developers, in writing, that this exact nightmare would unfold. To understand how this billion-dollar monument to vanity reached the brink of a structural crisis, we have to look at the ferocious, high-stakes world of Chinese mega-construction, where speed and prestige override reality. The story begins in the mid-2000s, during the peak of the urban real estate boom, with a mega-developer named Tycoon Harry Wang. Wang didn't want to build just another high-rise. He wanted to dominate the skyline with a structure so radical, so impossibly thin, that it would redefine luxury architecture forever. He partnered with the deep-pocketed Pacific Century Investment Group out of Shenzhen and handed the blueprints to an avant-garde architect known for monumental museums. Not high-wind residential physics, the design they settled on was shockingly simple. A perfect geometric square, measuring just 28.5 meters on each side, rising an astonishing 426 meters straight into the sky. That is a height-to-width aspect ratio of roughly 15:1. To visualize that, imagine taking a standard wooden chopstick and trying to stand it perfectly upright on a vibrating table during a storm. The inspiration? The architect famously bragged that the ultra-minimalist, grid-like shape was inspired by a century-old, geometric mesh wastebasket. Yes, you heard that right. A billionaire's residential trophy tower modeled directly after a trash can. And that design choice set off a ticking structural time bomb that is now exploding in the face of Shanghai's elite. The engineering chronology. Fit 500 cracks and a 7 million-page paper trail announcer. VO. To fully comprehend the sheer scale of the engineering deception at 432 Lujiazui Avenue, we have to look directly at the cold, hard numbers. This isn't a story about a bad batch of cement or a rogue contractor cutting corners on a rainy Tuesday. This is a chronological masterclass in structural hubris, meticulously documented across a mountain of evidence that has recently leaked from the Municipal Construction Commission's oversight files. Let's look at the timeline. Construction on this impossibly slender tower began with immense fanfare. To anchor a 426-meter concrete chopstick into the soft alluvial soil of the Yangtze River Delta, engineers had to push foundation technology to its absolute limit. Shanghai's geology is notorious among structural engineers. It is essentially a deep bed of soft clay and sand. To prevent the tower from tilting, workers sank massive concrete friction piles tens of meters into the earth, pouring thousands of cubic meters of high-strength concrete in continuous, non-stop cycles to form a monolithic basement mat. On paper, the engineering was a triumph. The concrete formula used for the exterior exoskeleton was a highly specialized, ultra-dense mix, cured under strict thermal monitoring to achieve a pristine, chalk-white finish. The goal was perfection. A flawless grid of 3-meter by 3-meter square windows, repeated identically from the first floor all the way up to the exclusive penthouses on the upper levels. By the time the tower topped out, it had consumed tens of thousands of metric tons of reinforced concrete, completely altering the silhouette of the financial district. But as the structure climbed higher into the sky, the laws of physics began to push back. Diagraph fix on screen. A 3D cross-section of the skyscraper appears, detailing the exterior exoskeleton. Digital callouts highlight tiny fractures expanding outwards from the window corners. Timestamps show the progression from 2016 to the present day, marking the structural settlement metrics in millimeters. Ouncer, VO. Every skyscraper settles. When you place millions of tons of concrete and steel onto the earth, the ground shifts. Engineers factor this in, calculating allowable settlement down to the exact millimeter. But at 432 Lujiazui Avenue, the settlement wasn't the only thing moving. The exterior walls were under a completely different kind of stress, because the white concrete facade doubles as the building's load-bearing spine. It is exposed directly to Shanghai's extreme weather cycles, blistering summer heat exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, followed by freezing winter winds sweeping in from the East China Sea. When concrete gets hot, it expands. When it gets cold, it contracts. But the massive steel rebar skeleton buried inside that concrete expands and contracts at a completely different rate. This thermal mismatch is an engineering reality, and usually, a building's decorative exterior curtain wall absorbs the movement, while the interior structure remains shielded. But here, remember, the skin is the structure. By the time the Municipal Housing Bureau granted its initial occupancy approvals, the building was already under intense internal strain. And then, the hairline fractures appeared. According to an explosive internal engineering audit later submitted in a sweeping multi-million yuan lawsuit by the Tower's Upscale Residential Committee, independent inspectors documented more than 1,500 distinct structural and design defects throughout the property. This wasn't cosmetic wear and tear. These were active, structural fissures slashing through the very elements holding the tower upright. And here is where the story stops being a tragic engineering accident and becomes a damning corporate scandal. The luxury condo board's legal team eventually unearthed a paper trail consisting of over 7 million pages of internal emails, memos, and structural submittals dating back to the early design phases. Let's go back to a crucial timestamp. October 2012. The tower is still rising. Inside the design headquarters, a fierce, quiet war is being waged via email. Project directors and senior engineering consultants are arguing over the exact chemical properties of the white concrete mix. One internal memo from a senior structural engineer explicitly warns the development team that they are heading down an incredibly dangerous path, one that he flatly predicted would result in widespread material failure, safety hazards, and inevitable legal warfare. The entire crisis boiled down to a catastrophic binary choice. In the leaked documents, an expert consultant summarized the dilemma in 3 unforgettable words: color or cracks. The engineering team laid it out in plain, unvarnished Chinese. If the developer demanded a pure, uninterrupted, raw white architectural finish to maintain the building's ultra-luxury aesthetic, the concrete would inevitably crack under environmental stress. If they wanted a structural surface engineered to resist cracking, they needed to apply a thick, flexible, elastoplastic protective membrane over the exterior. The catch? That protective coating would completely dull the pristine raw concrete aesthetic that Harry Wang had used to market the tower to Shanghai's elite buyers. The lawsuit alleges that the warning was completely waved off by the executive team. The developers looked at the numbers, looked at the marketing brochures, and chose the look over the longevity. They chose color. And in doing so, they signed a multi-billion yuan warrant for a slow-motion structural disaster. The wider systemic crisis, the structural pandemic of super-tall luxury on Osser. V if you think the structural disintegration of 432 Lujiazui Avenue is just an isolated incident, a single, cursed monument to vanity in the heart of Shanghai. You are missing the entire picture. This isn't a localized failure. It is the first loud, cracking warning sign of a systemic design pandemic that has quietly infected an entire generation of super-tall residential megaprojects across China's Tier 1 cities. Over the last 2 decades, China's skylines underwent a hyper-accelerated transformation. Cities like Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Chongqing, and Hangzhou raced to construct increasingly thin, gravity-defying luxury towers. It became an engineering arms race to see who could push the slenderness ratio to the absolute edge of what modern physics allows. But when you build that high, that fast, and that skinny, the structural trade-offs are no longer theoretical. They become terrifying realities. To understand how deep this structural crisis goes, we have to look across the country at the broader engineering landscape. Look at the iconic skyscrapers of Shenzhen's financial hub or the glittering waterfront towers of Guangzhou. For years, traditional high-rise design relied on a fundamentally safe, time-tested blueprint. A massive, rigid interior core made of high-strength steel and thick reinforced concrete, surrounded by an exterior curtain wall of glass and aluminum. The glass skin deflects the wind, while the hidden internal skeleton bears the weight and absorbs the movement. But 432 Lujiazui Avenue shattered that safety paradigm. By turning the exterior facade into a raw, load-bearing concrete exoskeleton, it became the global prototype for a dangerous new architectural trend, and its structural cracking mimics the failure modes that engineering institutes, like the China Academy of Building Research, have quietly been tracking in other hyper-slender developments nationwide. Kinetic screen graphics. A digital map of China flashes across the screen, highlighting super-tall hot zones in Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Chongqing. Comparative structural diagrams pop up, juxtaposing a traditional robust core tower against an ultra-thin pencil tower, tracking how wind shear impacts them differently. Announcer, VO take, for example. The engineering challenges faced by high rises in Chongqing's riverfront districts or Shenzhen's reclamation zones. In those coastal and river valley regions, megastructures are subjected to intense, unrelenting environmental forces. Deep soil settlement is a constant battle, where shifting underground silt layers cause buildings to micro-tilt over time. When a traditional building tilts or settles unevenly by just a few millimeters, its internal steel joints can flex to accommodate the stress. But what happens when your entire load-bearing system is made of rigid, unforgiving, exposed architectural concrete? The answer is structural trauma. Concrete is incredible under compression. It can bear massive vertical weight without flinching, but it is notoriously weak under tension and shear stress, forces that pull, twist, and bend. When a super-tall pencil tower is buffeted by the high-velocity wind, loads of an East China Sea typhoon, or when its foundation experiences microscopic uneven settlement in alluvial clay, the entire structure undergoes intense twisting forces, because the outer white shell of the Lujiazui Tower is the very thing holding it up. Those twisting forces convert directly into tearing forces inside the exterior concrete walls. This brings us right back to the structural phenomenon that keeps the country's top engineering minds awake at night. Spalling. When those micro-tiers open up on the windward side of a 400-meter tower, They act as tiny vacuum funnels during heavy monsoon downpours. Water is forced deep into the core of the load-bearing grid, hitting the high-tensile steel reinforcing bars. Rust is an aggressive, expanding disease. As the steel corrodes, it expands up to 6 times its original volume, generating thousands of pounds of internal pressure per square inch. The concrete literally chokes on its own internal bones, forcing outer chunks to shatter and break away. And we are already seeing parallel structural headaches across other luxury megaprojects. In several premium high-rises in Hangzhou and Guangzhou, residents in ultra-thin towers have quietly complained about excessive lateral sway during storms, eerie structural groaning noises, and mysterious micro-cracks spreading across their marble floors. The luxury real estate sector built an entire business model on selling the illusion of permanent, untouchable prestige high in the clouds. But physics doesn't care about luxury branding. 432 Lujiazui Avenue wasn't an anomaly, it was the ultimate guinea pig. It was the absolute limit of architectural ambition overriding structural humility, and the cracks are showing us exactly where that limit lies. The human cost, trapped in the clouds in the 1.1 billion yuan nightmare on Onser. These, while engineers debate, material science and corporate lawyers weaponize millions of pages of internal memos. The terrifying reality of this structural disaster falls squarely on the shoulders of the people who actually live inside it. For the ultra-wealthy elite of Shanghai, purchasing a sky mansion at 432 Lujiazui Avenue was supposed to be the ultimate statement of absolute safety, luxury, and prestige. Instead, it has transformed into a high-altitude house of horrors. This isn't just about watching the market value of a 100 million yuan asset curdle into a liability. This is about what happens when you are suspended nearly 400 meters in the air during a seasonal East China sea storm, and your billionaire sanctuary begins to sound and feel like the creaking hull of a sinking container ship. To truly understand the human cost, you have to look at the stories leaking past the premium mahogany doors of these luxury suites. Consider the case of Mr. Li, a high-profile technology investor who paid an astronomical sum for a full-floor residence on the 78th floor. Like every other buyer in the tower, Li was sold an illusion of permanent, flawless, architectural perfection. But less than a year after moving his family into their sky palace, the pristine illusion shattered. It started with a sound. Not a subtle hum, but a deep, resonant, structural groan that echoed through the walls whenever winds over the Huangpu River topped 50 kilometers per hour. As the impossibly slender concrete tower swayed by design to absorb the wind loads, the interior drywall, mechanical joints, and heavy structural segments began to grind against one another. Kintic text on screen. It sounds like a bomb going off. Excused resident testimony from court deposants. Answer V. According to explosive testimony later uncovered in the Luxury Residential Committee's multi-million yuan lawsuit against Pacific Century and Wang's corporate entities, residents described the noise inside their apartments during storms as utterly intolerable. The trash chutes, running vertically through the entire 426-meter height of the building, created such a violent kinetic pressure drop that whenever a heavy garbage bag was dropped from the upper penthouses, it sounded like an explosive detonation rippling through the lower units. Even more damning, internal files reveal that during a closed-door meeting, a senior executive from the co-development firm privately admitted to colleagues that the internal vibration and structural groaning in heavy weather was so severe that it made regular sleep completely impossible. But structural noise was only the opening act. Then came the floods because of the extreme lateral sway of such an incredibly skinny concrete tower. The building's complex, high-pressure, internal plumbing and fire suppression systems are subjected to constant, violent flexing forces. In 2016, a wealthy tech entrepreneur who had signed an agreement to purchase an entire upper-tier floor walked away from a massive deposit after witnessing what building staff described as a catastrophic internal rupture. A high-pressure water pipe had literally sheared apart under the strain of the building's micro-movement, sending tens of thousands of liters of water cascading down through the structural core. Just 2 years later, a separate, even more devastating plumbing failure sent a torrent of water pouring directly into the main elevator shafts. In a standard 20-story apartment block, an elevator breakdown is an annoying inconvenience. But when you live on the 84th floor of a super tall skyscraper, losing your vertical transit system is a full-blown emergency. The water completely fried the electronic control systems, knocking two of the building's primary high-speed residential elevators completely out of service. Not for a matter of hours, but for weeks on end. Elderly residents and families were effectively trapped in the upper atmosphere, unable to leave their luxury compounds without facing a grueling, dangerous descent down hundreds of flights of emergency concrete stairs. According to records submitted to Shanghai's Municipal Housing Bureau, just two of these catastrophic water-related incidents in a single calendar year piled up an astonishing 68 million yuan in covered insurance losses. Within 24 months, the building's property insurance premiums reportedly tripled, forcing the residential committee to levy massive, unannounced financial assessments on the owners just to keep the building operational. One prominent businesswoman, Ms. Zhang, documented over 3.5 million yuan in direct structural and cosmetic water damage to her custom-designed apartment alone, after an upper floor line burst and rained down through her imported acoustic ceilings. Fast-paced, dramatic visuals. The screen flashes black. Wind howling sound effects blast through the audio mix. A digital clock counts down. Halloween night. 94 minutes trapped. 380 meters in the air announcer. VO. But the absolute peak of this high-rise nightmare occurred on a stormy autumn night. A resident stepped into one of the remaining high-speed elevators on an upper floor, just as a severe wind advisory hit the Lujiazui Financial District. As the violent wind shear slammed against the exterior concrete exoskeleton, the tower began its calculated lateral sway to prevent the massive steel elevator cables from twisting and snapping inside the shaft. The building's automated safety software was programmed to immediately slow the cabs down or freeze them entirely when the tower's displacement exceeded safety margins. The system worked, but at a horrific human cost. The elevator ground to a screeching halt, trapping the resident inside a cramped metallic box suspended hundreds of meters above the ground. For 1 hour and 34 minutes, as the entire super-tall skyscraper flexed, groaned, and vibrated around them, in the dark, they remained trapped in mid-air, listening to the structural bones of the tower scream under the weight of the storm. Welcome to life at the absolute top of the financial pyramid today. Those elite buyers who thought they were purchasing a permanent monument to their success are facing a brutal reality. One independent engineering assessment puts the ultimate cost of retrofitting and repairing that cracked, deteriorating white concrete exoskeleton at a staggering 1.1 billion yuan. A multi-year, highly disruptive structural overhaul that will require wrapping the entire 426-meter exterior in heavy industrial scaffolding, destroying the very view and aesthetic that these billionaires paid tens of millions of dollars to secure. The address that once sold itself has become a golden cage. Selling an apartment in a building publicly branded as a structural defect nightmare is nearly impossible at face value. Millions of dollars in personal capital have evaporated into thin air, leaving Shanghai's elite holding the bill for a structure that was told it could look perfect, or it could last, and explicitly chose the look, the spreading risk and the final choice, color, cracks, and the future of the skyline announcer VO. So, where does this unprecedented high-rise war end? As we enter 2026, the legal and structural battleground over 432 Lujiazui Avenue has escalated from a quiet construction dispute into an all-out, multi-front war inside Shanghai's economic tribunals. This is no longer just about a leaky pipe or a few hairline fissures on a balcony. The gloves are completely off. The residential committee, backed by a formidable team of corporate litigators, has officially launched a massive, far-reaching fraud lawsuit targeting Pacific Century Investment Group, Tycoon Harry Wang's corporate entities, and the primary engineering firms involved in the project. After sifting through that titanic 7-million-page mountain of internal emails and putting structural designers through over 100 days of intense legal depositions, the board isn't just claiming the building was poorly built. They are alleging a coordinated, systematic conspiracy to intentionally hide the severity of the structural degradation from wealthy buyers and municipal safety inspectors during the final handover phases. The financial stakes are staggering. The lawsuit is demanding over 1.1 billion yuan in direct restitution to fund the massive concrete overhaul, plus punitive damages that could push the total penalty into the stratosphere. But the developers are digging in their heels, fiercely rejecting every single allegation. In public statements filed with the Municipal Construction Commission, Pacific Century, and the primary local architect of record have vehemently denied concealing any structural risks. They claim the board's multi-million yuan lawsuit is entirely meritless, and their defense relies on a very specific, very clever technicality. They point out that despite the 3,500 documented defects, the tower has consistently passed every single mandatory municipal facade safety inspection. A spokesperson for the developer even turned the blame right back on the billionaires living inside it, arguing that the external concrete deterioration isn't a design flaw at all. Instead, they claim it is a maintenance failure by the residential committee, who allegedly failed to reapply the specialized protective chemical sealers required to keep moisture out of the exterior exoskeleton. In other words, don't blame the people who built the Sky Mansion. Blame the people who bought it for not painting it often enough. Dramatic, suspenseful music swells. The camera pans slowly down from the dizzying, white geometric peak of the tower, tracking past the cracks, all the way to the teeming streets of Shanghai below. High-tech on-screen text over blue architectural schematics summarizes the ultimate engineering lesson. Announcer, VO. Let's be absolutely clear about one thing. 432 Lujiazui Avenue is not at risk of an imminent, catastrophic structural collapse. Independent structural engineers who have reviewed the case confirm that the tower's heavy concrete pile foundations and core systems are safely anchored. It is not going to fall over, but it now carries a permanent, indelible double identity. To the outside world, it remains a dazzling, hyper-luxury icon of the Shanghai skyline. But to the engineering community, it is a sobering, multi-billion yuan cautionary tale about what happens when architectural ambition completely outruns engineering humility, which brings us right back to the single, damning detail that exposes the root cause of this entire disaster. The most critical decision in this whole billion-dollar saga wasn't made by a worker pouring concrete in a storm or a city inspector rushing through an active job site. It was made years before the first resident ever moved in, captured in an internal email that was just 3 words long, collar or cracks. That was the binary choice laid out by the engineering team. The developer could have a building engineered to fully resist the brutal structural realities of high-altitude physics, or they could have the pristine, pure white aesthetic that allowed them to sell apartments for a 140 million yuan apiece. They were told in plain, unvarnished language that they could not have both. They picked color. They chose how the building would look over how the building would last. Every great architectural masterpiece is a silent, sacred promise that beauty and structural safety can peacefully coexist at the exact same address. But 432 Lujiazui Avenue is what happens when those two values are put on a corporate ballot, and vanity wins the vote. As you look up at the impossibly thin, glittering glass and concrete pencil towers dominating the horizons of Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Chongqing, a chilling question remains. How many of those icons were quietly given the exact same choice behind closed doors? How many developers were told, color or cracks, and made the exact same choice? Tell us what you think in the comments below. Is this the cost of modern architectural progress, or a warning sign that our skylines are pushing past the limits of safety? Like,